The lake house in Vermont was supposed to fix something. Or at least, that's what I told myself during the 6-hour drive up from Boston, while Emma barely said a word. Her face lit up when her sister texted, when her mom called to check in about groceries, when Spotify played that god-awful remix of a song she used to dance to in college. But not once did she look over at me and smile. I noticed the way her body angled toward the window, the way her thumbs flew across her phone when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I didn't ask who she was texting. I didn't want to know. Part of me still believed this trip could change things. We used to love this place. The porch swing, the squeaky screen door, the smell of pine and lake water clinging to the air. It was the backdrop to the early years, back when we were still a team. Back when we'd sneak away during family dinners just to be alone on the dock, wrapped up in blankets and plans. Those nights felt like lifetimes ago. As soon as we pulled into the gravel driveway, she jumped out before I'd even put the car in park. Her mom was already on the porch with her arms out, calling Emma's name like a sitcom character. They hugged like it had been years. No one looked at me. I grabbed the bags out of the trunk in silence and followed them inside. Everything felt too bright, too loud. The kitchen buzzed with her relatives talking over one another. Her dad was fiddling with the broken ice machine again. Her cousin Kyle was already cracking open beers and tossing them out like party favors. Emma slipped seamlessly into it, like she'd never left, like she belonged. And I didn't. She didn't introduce me. No one said, "Oh hey Mark, how's it going?" I hovered like a guest in a stranger's home until her sister finally gave me a polite nod and a half smile. That was the welcome. We were staying in the upstairs guest room. Used to be her room as a teenager. Still had posters on the wall from bands she'd mocked me for liking. I put the bags down and turned to say something, anything, to her. She was already in the bathroom, door closed, water running. Later that night, when the house filled with the smells of roasting meat and her mom's famous cornbread, I tried to pull myself together. Maybe it was just travel fatigue. Maybe she was anxious. I clung to the maybes like they were lifelines. Dinner was a full-blown event. The table was packed. 2 folding chairs had to be brought in from the garage to fit everyone. Plates overflowed with food. Wine glasses refilled faster than I could keep track. It had the bones of something warm, nostalgic. I tried to lean into it. I sat across from Kyle and started telling him about the app I'd been working on, a farm-to-table grocery delivery service for small towns. It wasn't glamorous, but it had real momentum. We had just landed our 4th town in western Massachusetts, and I was finally feeling like the pieces were clicking. Kyle seemed interested. He asked a few questions. I started to relax. For a moment, I wasn't invisible. I was building something, and someone actually gave a damn. Then Emma laughed, loud enough to cut through every conversation at the table. "Oh my God," she said, still laughing. "He's still on that?" The table quieted. She turned to Kyle. "I swear, every 6 months it's a new obsession. Last year it was artisanal jerky. Before that, he wanted to start a podcast interviewing. What was it? Failed inventors." Her mom giggled. Someone else chuckled too, maybe her uncle. I felt my ears burning. "I'm serious," she went on. "You should have seen the garage. Looked like a meth lab with drone parts everywhere." More laughter. Not cruel exactly, but careless. No one told her to stop. No one looked uncomfortable. I tried to smile, but my throat tightened. "I think it's cool," Kyle said half-heartedly. Emma snorted. "Of course you do. You've always been too nice." Then she dropped her voice slightly, but made sure everyone could still hear. "Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking. I think I just married him because I was bored." It hit like S***er punch to the chest. The entire table went silent. I could hear the fireplace crackling. A fork clinked against a plate. Her sister shifted uncomfortably. But no one said anything. No one defended me. No one looked surprised. I stared at her, at the woman I'd once driven through a blizzard just to see. The woman I thought I'd grow old with. Her face was blank. Bored even. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't make a speech. I just left. Walked out through the front door, past the porch, down the gravel driveway. I heard someone call my name, maybe her dad, maybe no one at all. I didn't look back. The air was sharp and cold. My feet crunched through the damp leaves along the edge of the woods. I kept walking. My hands were shaking. My jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. In that moment, I felt like something had snapped. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. Not in that house. Not in that marriage. Not in that version of myself, the one who stayed quiet while being slowly erased. Somewhere in the distance, the lake reflected the moonlight like broken glass. I stopped at the water's edge and stared at it for a long time. That was the moment everything changed. Not just the marriage. Me. I drove all night. No GPS. No plan. Just the rhythm of tires on pavement and the sound of my own breathing to keep me company. The lake faded behind me like a bad dream, swallowed by the dark roads winding through the Vermont countryside. I didn't stop for gas until the tank screamed at me. Even then, I kept my head down, paid cash, didn't talk to anyone. Couldn't. I wasn't ready to hear my own voice. It would have made everything too real. Somewhere around sunrise, I found myself crossing into Iowa. Des Moines wasn't a destination. It just happened to be where the road took me. A city big enough to disappear in, small enough not to feel like I'd been swallowed whole. I remembered that an old college buddy, Nate, lived there. We hadn't talked in years, maybe 5 or more, but I dug through my contacts and found his number. I didn't even think before calling. He picked up after the second ring. "Hello, Nate, it's Mark." A beat of silence. Then, "Holy sh*T, man. You okay?" "No, I wasn't. But I didn't say that. Can I crash at your place for a while?" He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, man. Come through. Got a cot above the shop. It's not much, but it's yours." The shop was a greasy old auto garage tucked behind a diner that hadn't changed its menu since the 70s. The cot sat above it in a cramped loft with a tiny kitchenette, one window, and walls that smelled like diesel and metal. It wasn't home, but it was real. Honest. No granite countertops, no curated decor, no Instagram-perfect anything. Just a place to breathe. The first couple of days I slept, ate barely anything, drank too much diner coffee and sat on the roof with a blanket Nate loaned me, staring at the skyline like it might have answers. Emma didn't call, didn't text, didn't send a single, "Where are you?" Nothing. The silence said more than words ever could. That's when it really hit me. She didn't care. Not about me. Not about the man who built a life around her. The man who endured her cold moods, her snide jokes, her long silences. She used to be warm, I think. Maybe I just imagined that part. It's hard to separate memory from wishful thinking when the ground beneath you's been shifting for so long. So I stopped looking at my phone. Stopped caring what she was posting, who she was with, where she was sleeping. I unfollowed her on every platform and deleted our shared calendar. It was like performing surgery without anesthesia, cutting out every piece of her that had rooted itself in my routines. Painful but necessary. Then I got to work. Not out of revenge. Not even out of anger. I just needed something to rebuild. And I figured if she'd spent so long treating me like I was disposable, maybe it was time I stopped living like I owed her anything. I started going through the business files, my app, the LLC paperwork, the website domain registrations. I hadn't looked at this stuff with clear eyes in months, maybe years. There were small cracks everywhere. Old billing errors, unclaimed credits, outdated terms. I fixed them, one by one, quietly, surgically. Emma had never cared much about the business. Said she didn't understand tech. Said it wasn't exciting. But she was listed as a co-owner on the books. At the time it felt romantic. "Our business," I told her. She smiled, said, "Sure, whatever you say." I changed that. With help from an old tax advisor I hadn't spoken to since we bought the house. I restructured everything. Transferred ownership. Shifted accounts. Closed and reopened licenses. It was slow work, but it gave me purpose. Each document signed, each line item corrected. It was like laying bricks under my feet, one step at a time, building the floor back under a man who'd been free-falling. The house was next. She loved that house. Or maybe she loved the way it looked in photos. Emma had a thing for curated appearances. She decorated for the holidays in August, hosted parties with cheese boards and candlelight like we were auditioning for a magazine spread. But the mortgage, the upkeep, she didn't touch that stuff. That was my role silent partner, the one holding up the stage lights while she performed. I started the paperwork to buy her out of it. No confrontations, no calls, just legal notices and filings. She didn't respond right away, so I followed up through the lawyer. Eventually, she signed. I don't know if she even read it. Maybe she thought I was bluffing. Maybe she thought I was still too broken to take real action. She was wrong. While she posted filtered photos of yoga retreats and beach sunsets with captions about choosing peace, I was rewriting the very structure of the life she'd walked out on. She told people she was healing. Maybe she believed that. But healing doesn't usually involve pretending the person you betrayed never existed. It wasn't about taking things from her. It was about reclaiming what I had built, what she had ignored, what she had made small with every eye roll, every dismissive comment, every moment she looked past me like I was a placeholder. Nate didn't ask many questions. He saw the storm in my eyes and gave me space. We'd sit on the roof some nights, him with a beer, me with diner coffee, talking about anything but her. I think that saved me more than he knows. One morning, maybe 3 weeks in, I woke up before dawn and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Something had shifted. I didn't feel whole, not even close, but I felt clear. The kind of clarity that comes after a long sickness breaks. I realized I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want an apology. I just wanted to stop letting her live in my head. So I got dressed. I packed my bag. I shook Nate's hand and promised to keep in touch. Then I drove back. Not for her. For me. I pulled up to the house just before noon on a Tuesday, sun high and unbothered, like the universe didn't care one bit that I was stepping back into the wreckage. It was strange how familiar everything looked. The chipped brick by the front steps, the faded welcome mat we bought during a wine-fueled Target run. Her car was parked in the driveway like nothing had changed. But everything had. I stood there for a minute, hand on the door, not knocking, not hesitating either. Just taking one last breath before I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The key still worked. She hadn't changed the locks. She probably didn't think I'd have the nerve to come back. When I stepped inside, it hit me all at once. Her scent, soft and floral, hanging in the air like a ghost. The living room was exactly how she liked it. Throw pillows arranged just so. Candles unlit but strategically placed. A blanket folded neatly across the arm of the couch for no one in particular. She was there, of course, sitting on that same couch, legs tucked beneath her, scrolling through her phone like the world revolved around whatever tiny screen she held in her hand. She looked up when I entered. For a second, her face lit up like some automatic reflex. Then she registered it was me. The light vanished. "Mark?" she said, blinking like she couldn't believe it. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I didn't take off my jacket. I didn't sit down. I pulled the folder out of my bag and placed it on the table between us. A quiet thud. That sound, it changed everything. Her eyebrows pulled together in confusion. She reached for the folder slowly, like it might bite. "What is this? Read it." She opened it, scanned the top page, and her entire posture changed. Her shoulders went stiff, mouth parting slightly. I watched her eyes move down the page. Ownership transfer, legal filings, financial restructuring, the house, the business, everything. Her voice was smaller when she finally spoke. "This is real." I nodded. "It's all done. Signed. Filed. It's mine now." She stared at me, and for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't know what to say. Emma, the woman who always had a snarky comeback, who could dismantle my words like she was swatting flies, was speechless. You did this behind my back?" That almost made me laugh. I raised an eyebrow. "Behind your back? You weren't around. You made sure of that." Her mouth opened like she wanted to protest, but the words didn't come. She looked down at the folder again, flipping through the pages as if searching for some kind of loophole. but there wasn't one. I made sure of that. She closed the folder and set it down slowly. Then she looked at me in a way I hadn't seen since we first met. Not like I was weak. Not like I was a burden. She looked at me like I was a stranger she couldn't quite place. "This is really happening," she said, not even asking. "Yeah, it is." For a few moments she just sat there. No tears. No dramatic meltdown. Just silence. I think that scared her more than anything. She was used to the old me, the guy who'd beg for affection, who'd stay quiet to keep the peace, who'd let things go because fighting felt like losing her. But I wasn't that man anymore. She didn't leave right away. For a few days, she hung around like a shadow. She'd offer to make dinner, leave notes by the coffee machine, laugh a little too loud when I was on the phone with someone. Like she thought if she just acted sweet enough, warm enough, she could rewrite the past. I didn't stop her, but I didn't engage either. I lived around her, not with her. She'd ask if I wanted to watch a movie. I'd say I was busy. She'd bring up old memories. I'd nod, then walk away. She left little signs of herself everywhere, like breadcrumbs back to a version of us that no longer existed. And every day, I could see it getting to her. That confusion behind her eyes. That slow realization that the script she'd always controlled was no longer in her hands. That she wasn't the one writing this ending. One night, she knocked on the door of the room I'd claimed as my own. She stood there in her pajamas. Familiar ones, the ones she used to wear when things were good between us. Her arms were crossed, eyes soft. Like she was trying to summon some version of herself that I'd still love. "Can we talk?" she asked. I leaned against the doorframe. "What's left to say?" "I don't know. I want to understand. Why are you doing this now?" I tilted my head. "Now? Emma, this should have happened a long time ago. You just didn't notice." She flinched a little, like she didn't expect me to be so calm, so steady. "I know I messed up," she said quietly. "But this feels like punishment." "It's not punishment," I said. "It's reality. I finally stopped waiting for you to see me." Her eyes watered, but I didn't move. I didn't soften. "I miss us," she whispered. "There's no us," I replied. "Not anymore." She stayed quiet for a beat. Then she nodded, stepping back. "I'll start looking for a place." "Take your time," I said. "There's no rush." But we both knew she was already gone. The next morning, the notes stopped. No more surprise dinners. No more hovering in the hallway waiting for me to say something. She moved through the house like someone packing up a dream they thought would last forever. But the truth is, it ended the moment she chose herself over us. All I did was make it official. A week later, she left. No dramatic goodbye. No parting speech on the porch with tears running down her face. She packed what she needed while I was at work and was gone by the time I came back. A couple of her sweaters still hung in the closet, and her perfume still clung to the pillowcases, but the air felt different. Lighter, like the house had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. I walked through each room that night, slowly, deliberately. My footsteps echoed in the kitchen where she used to cook with the music too loud. In the hallway where we'd laughed about things I can't even remember now. Every memory still clung to the corners, but they didn't hurt like they used to. They were just there, like dust on a bookshelf. Things you can't avoid but no longer feel the weight of. She texted once. Just one line. "I hope one day you'll forgive me." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I didn't owe her anything anymore. Forgiveness wasn't hers to ask for. It was mine to carry, and I wasn't ready to set it down. I should have felt lonely. I expected to, but I didn't. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I could breathe in my own home again. I could make a cup of coffee without wondering if I was walking into another cold shoulder or an unsolicited critique about how I loaded the dishwasher. It was strange how quickly normal came back when it was just me. And then, slowly, things began to shift. The app, the one she used to mock, got picked up by a regional startup accelerator out of Dallas. A grant came through. Then a partnership with a logistics firm that saw potential in our rural distribution model. Suddenly, the thing that was cute in a tragic way was gaining traction. I was invited to speak at a conference in Chicago, then another in Denver. I bought a suit that fit. I got a haircut I actually liked. I started running again, early in the mornings when the streets were still empty. It hurt at first, everything did. My body had been neglected as badly as my self-worth. But step by step, mile by mile, I started to rebuild. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about becoming the version of me I used to dream about being, the one who didn't shrink himself to make someone else comfortable. My face started showing up in newsletters, business roundups, a couple podcasts. Nothing massive, but enough to start getting calls from investors, journalists, people who had dismissed me before. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I stopped trying to impress anyone, everyone suddenly started paying attention. And then came the family gathering. Her brother's house in upstate New York. I almost didn't go. The invite came in a group text from her sister, neutral, vague, probably sent out of obligation. Part of me thought it was a trap. Another part of me didn't care. I wasn't afraid of facing them anymore. I drove up in a rented car, dressed sharp but not flashy. Just enough to show I had changed. Enough to let the room feel the shift before I even said a word. The moment I walked in, I saw it. The way heads turned. The way conversations paused. Her father stood up and shook my hand like he was meeting me for the first time. Her sister asked about the app. Her cousin Kyle, same guy who laughed at me over Thanksgiving dinner, clapped me on the back and said he'd been following the company's growth. Emma was there. She hovered around the edges, laughing too hard at people's jokes, drifting from group to group like a balloon with no anchor. She wore a dress I used to love, and maybe she thought it would remind me of something soft. But all it did was highlight the distance between the woman she was and the man I'd become. She tried to insert herself into my conversation with Kyle, dropping a snide little, "Guess the app thing actually worked out," with a weak smile. But I didn't bite. I didn't look at her. I didn't even acknowledge the jab. I turned to Kyle and said, "We've still got a long way to go, but it's good to be taken seriously again." She laughed, a little too high-pitched. Then she drifted away. Later that night, as I was leaving, she caught me near the coat rack. Everyone else was saying goodbyes and hugging and making plans for brunch. She waited until I was alone. "Mark," she said gently, "can we talk?" I looked at her, really looked. The makeup was flawless. The smile was practiced. But her eyes, they were tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from the realization that she couldn't charm her way out of this version of reality. "There's nothing to talk about," I said. She stepped a little closer. "I miss you." "No," I said calmly. "You miss the man who put you first. He's not here anymore." Her eyes filled, but I didn't feel satisfaction. Just closure. I walked out the door, buttoned my coat, and got into my car without looking back. A few days later, she showed up at the house. Unannounced. She waited by the door as I adjusted my tie for a meeting. She looked nervous, unsure. Not like her at all. "Can we try again?" she asked. "Therapy, counseling. I'll do whatever it takes." I just looked at her, my reflection behind her in the hallway mirror. I looked strong, grounded. Nothing like the man who had once begged her to stay. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I'm not yours anymore." She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I grabbed my keys, walked past her, and closed the door behind me. Not slamming it, just ending it. She didn't call again. I heard she moved to a smaller place on the east side. Still posts quotes about healing and growth. Still curates a version of herself she thinks people will admire. But I'm not part of that audience anymore. The funny thing about pain is that you think it's going to destroy you. You think you'll never recover. But one day you wake up and realize it made space. Space for peace. For growth. For truth. I'm not angry anymore. I don't dream of revenge or wonder if she regrets it. Maybe she does. Maybe she doesn't. It doesn't matter. Because I made it out.